Okay, let's go. Welcome everybody to this talk on lying and truth-telling. My name is Johannes Abeler. I'm Professor of Economics at the University of Oxford. And this talk is part of two series. First of all, it's part of the Festival of Social Sciences, which is, if you join through that angle, is a sequence of talks and events across the UK about social sciences, and in particular in this year about our working lives. So I'll talk about that. It goes for the next two weeks. There's events all over the country, and we'll post the link later on if you want more, if you want to learn more about social sciences and not just about lying and truth-telling. This talk is also part of a sequence that we run in our Department of Economics here in Oxford, which we call What Economists Really Do, where we describe, where I and my colleagues talk about what we actually do. There's lots of misconceptions out there in the world what economists do, that it's all about money, it's all about inflation. And while some of our colleagues work on money and inflation, most of us don't work on that. And we just want to show the breadth of what economics is actually doing, what economic research at a university does. So today, in these two talks, in these two sequences, I want to talk about whether men lie more than women. And I want to talk in general about lying and truth-telling. So lying and truth-telling is all around us. And when you think about lying and honesty, you might think of things like celebrity traitors. Perhaps some of you are watching this. There's the traitors and then the faithfuls, and the faithfuls have to find out who the traitors are, and the traitors are trying to kill, or sort of metaphorically kill, the others, and nobody knows who is whom. So everybody is trying to pretend to be a faithful. Everybody's lying to each other. Friends are lying to friends, and it's very interesting to watch. It's fun to watch. Perhaps you think about that when you think about lying and truth-telling, or you think about people saying, I love you, and you might think, oh, that might be true or might not be true. If that's what you think about lying, then the question really is where the economics is in all of that. You see, I'm a professor of economics, and this is supposed to be a talk about economics, and we're talking when it's not a talk about celebrity traitors, which I know is disappointing, but where's the economics in lying and truth-telling? Well, it turns out that almost all our economic decisions, the decisions that we make in our life, have to contain a bit of lying and truth-telling. And I'll give you some examples. I just go through your work history, through your life. So imagine you finished school and you apply to university. If you apply to a UK university, like Oxford, you'll have to write a personal statement as part of your UCAS form. And then I would be one of the people who receives this UCAS form and read your personal statement. And I've read lots of personal statements in my life. And some of these candidates say things like here on the slide, when I read Descartes, I especially liked his argument that da, 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 da. You see, in Oxford, we have this degree for politics, philosophy, and economics. And so here's a candidate who claims to have read Descartes, which is actually quite difficult, in particular when you're a 16-year-old. So that's actually quite impressive, except when you talk to these people, sometimes they actually haven't read Descartes. Then on a good day, they've read the Wikipedia page on philosophy, but they pretend to have read Descartes. Some people who write these things actually have read Descartes, but I, as the receiver of this, I, as reader of this person's statement, just don't know. So the candidate knows what they've read, and they tell me about it, and what they tell me, namely that they've read Descartes, could be true or could not be true. And now I have to figure out what to do with that. So let's imagine this person has read Descartes, great student, is admitted to Oxford, great career, now leaves university and becomes, let's say, a salesman, is selling used cars, and in this picture here, tells this lady who is interested in buying a car, says this car is like new. Now, is this car really like new? Who knows? The seller knows, the guy knows here in this case, and claims that this car is like new, and the lady has to believe him, or has to sort of figure out whether that's true or not. But again, this person can lie. So imagine you're not you don't become a used car dealer, but you become a doctor, in most countries, doctors make more money when they run more expensive procedures. So there's a little bit of an incentive to exaggerate the need for expensive things. So here's an MRI, and here's the doctor who says, you need this expensive procedure. And the patient doesn't know whether that's really necessary. The insurer doesn't really know whether it's necessary. Only the doctor knows whether it's really true. Some people really need these expensive procedures, and it's right for the patient or for the insurer to pay, but perhaps sometimes they exaggerate and they lie. So again, here's private information, what we economists call private information. The doctor knows what the real correct procedure is and tells the patient, tells the insurer about it. But perhaps you become not a used car dealer, you don't become a doctor, you become a politician, and you go around the world and say, making claims about your cognitive abilities, you might say, I'm a stable genius. Again, is that true or not? I don't know. Here's actually quite an interesting case. This is a picture of Donald Trump, as you might have figured out. Perhaps Donald Trump thinks that he's a stable genius. Might not be true, might think that is, which sort of opens the philosophical question whether this might then even be a lie. If he thinks it's true, even though it might actually be true or not true in reality. Perhaps we can talk about that later on in the Q&A. Now, whatever your job is, hopefully you earn some money. And then in most countries, including in the UK, you need to declare your income. In the UK, it's all quite automated. But if you earn some extra money, even at least then you need to put in a tax declaration. So in the tax declaration, perhaps you say, oh, I only earned very little additional money. And that means you don't have to pay much extra tax. So that's quite a good thing to be able to claim that you didn't earn extra money. The problem is, if you did earn extra money, then you're supposed to declare it, but that costs money because you need to pay taxes on it. So there might be an urge that you don't declare and that you lie on a tax declaration. That's obviously illegal, and I don't advise that. But I'm just saying that there's many, many economic situations where you know something, you know whether you read the card, you know what good this car is, you know whether this procedure is necessary, you know how much you've earned, and you tell another person about that. It's almost harder to find a situation where people don't have any private information than finding a situation where people have information, where people have private information. So because there are so many situations where that's the case, economists have thought about what people do in these situations for quite a long time. Really starting in the 1950s and 1960s, it started out often with theoretical research that we would try to predict what people would do. In most of that theoretical research, economists assumed that people say whatever lies in their immediate interests. They have no concerns about lying or telling the truth. They just want to maximize money, which is unfortunately which often then leads to having to lie. So going back to the tax situation, even if you earn money, if you earn money, you are supposed to declare it. It might be in your immediate interest to not declare it and then save on the taxes, evade the taxes. Let's imagine that there's no possibility of you being found out and there's no penalties, nothing. So often it's the case that it's in your personal direct monetary interest to lie. So that's what economists have assumed for decades. But when you think back to what your parents told you when you were kids, or perhaps you're still a kid and your parents are telling you that most of parents will tell their kids that lying is a bad thing. I have kids, I tell my kids lying is a bad thing. And your teachers will tell you that lying is a bad thing. And when you go to church, your priest, your pastor, they will all tell you that lying is a bad thing. Actually, it turns out there's no religion in the world that I know of that says that lying is totally fine. All of our moral systems tell us that lying is a bad thing. But that means you're in a dilemma now. Because on the one hand, you want to do what the economists assume. You want to earn the money, you like the money, but then on the other hand, you don't want to go to hell. So how do you solve this dilemma? How do people solve this dilemma between the lure of the money and sort of the problem about the morality or the religious or whatever sort of thing that holds you or might hold you back from lying? So in the end, it's really an empirical question. We need to have some data to find out how people report private information. What do people do when they have private information? Do they lie? Do they tell the truth? Do they do something in between? And that's what we're trying to find out today. I should have said that we'll have a Q&A at the end. If you have any questions, just post them into the Q&A, and then we'll pull them together and answer them at the end. I'll talk about until 12:45, and then we'll start with the questions. So how do you find out about how people report private information? It turns out that's actually quite difficult, because lying is about things that we cannot find out. That's sort of the essence of a lie. So if I lie about sort of that I wear glasses today, so let me tell you that I'm not wearing glasses today. That's not correct, because you see, I do wear glasses, but it doesn't really feel like a lie because you can verify that straight away. I don't really feel bad about it because I didn't cheat you. I mean, I didn't convince any of you that I didn't wear glasses because you can see that I do wear glasses. So I would need to tell you something about whether I wear shoes, which I won't show you. So I could lie about whether I wear shoes. But that means lying is always about something that we cannot find out. So finding out about whether people do lie or not is then by definition difficult. Okay? So there's different approaches how people have thought about how we can find out. Here's the first one, is perhaps we could just ask people, not about whether people wear glasses or shoes. We can just ask people, how dishonest are you? Are you a liar? Do you lie often? Is it okay to lie? Would you lie to your partner? Do you lie to your husband? Do you lie to your wife? And there are people who've done this. Here's it's quite an old study here from the University of Essex. They've asked 2,000 people in the UK, essentially, do you lie, or is it okay to lie? And then 10 years later, they asked 2,000 other people, and again, asked the same questions. Is it okay to lie? Do you lie? And they find that in the second study, 10 years later, people were more dishonest than 10 years ago. Okay, so that's quite bad news here for the UK because it seems that honesty is going downhill. I don't like this study, I have to admit. And the main reason is, what do we have to believe about these 2,000 people that answer this questionnaire? What do we have to assume about their behavior in the survey, about in the surveys about dishonesty? For this study to generate reliable results, we need to assume that everybody told the truth in the survey, which might not be a good assumption because this study finds that people have become more dishonest. So the survey must have become more unreliable. But then we're also sort of going around in circles. So if we can't trust the people answering honestly in the survey, so then we can't trust the survey. So perhaps people haven't become dishonest because the survey doesn't tell us anything. This is actually a very old problem that has been around for a couple of thousand years. Here's the guy who perhaps talked about this first, Epimenides. He was living in Crete, a philosopher who lived, as I said, quite a long time ago. And he discovered this paradox that it's just very hard to believe someone who says, I'm a liar. So he framed it as he was from Crete, and he said his sentence was, all Cretans are liars. But essentially, a simpler version of that is, I'm a liar. So let's imagine the question I ask you, are you a liar or not? Let's imagine in the world there's only people who lie or who don't lie. Yeah, so there's sort of some people who always lie and some people who can, I don't know what, psychologically, genetically cannot lie. Okay, so if I ask you, are you a liar? Now, if you are truly one of the people who are liars, then you should say, no, I'm not a liar. Because in actual fact, you are a liar, but you always have to lie. So you have to say, no, I'm not a liar. And if you're one of the truthful people who always have to say the truth, I ask you, are you a liar? And you say truthfully, you say, I'm not a liar. Okay, so that means that the liars say, I'm not a liar. And the truthful people say, I'm not a liar. So if someone says, I'm a liar, it's really difficult to know what that means because it can't be one of the liars and can't be someone of the truthful. So what is actually the content of the sentence? So this wasn't a problem that just appeared 2,000 and more years ago in philosophy, has been ongoing. Sort of there's studies in the 1930s, lots of interest around Gödel's impossibility theory, where it turns out that there's sentences, utterances that are not truthful and are not false, but are some sort of in between sort of third notion of undecidable. So asking people, coming back to, we want to find out, coming back to the original question where we want to find out whether people lie or not. The problem here is that if I ask people directly, I have to assume that they're honest in the answer to me, and that might be not the right way to go about, because if I assume that, then I don't need to find out. And perhaps, and I expect some people will lie. So perhaps let's not ask the question directly. That might not be a good way to find out about whether people lie or not. Is there another way? Is there a better way to find out whether people lie or not? And I think there is. So let's start with a wish list. So I want actual behavior. I don't want to rely on you telling me truthfully whether you lie or not. I want to observe your lie directly, and then I can tell for myself whether you lied or not. But for that, I need you to lie during my observation. So I need a clear incentive for you to lie. So I need to get you to lie. And then I can measure how much you lie, or I can measure how much something holds you back. Perhaps religion or morality or something might hold you back from lying. But I need some rubber band, some force that pulls you towards lying to measure how strong that force is that might hold you back from lying. Okay? I also want, number 3, I want that your private information is truly private. You remember when I said about lying about my glasses? My private information, whether I wear glasses or not, that's not truly private because you can see that. So the lie doesn't really become a meaningful lie any longer. I want people lie like they lie in real world. I want them to lie about things that we cannot directly observe, whether they evade taxes or whether this medical procedure is really necessary. So I want people to lie like in the real world. And then I don't want any possibility of detection. I don't want any punishment. Again, we can add that later in if you want, because that might hold you back from lying, and that might be quite interesting, whether we can create a situation where we can make people lie less, perhaps through detection or through punishment. But let's begin with no possibility of detection. Give the lie all the chances in the world. So that's quite a long wish list, but it turns out there were some clever economists, Urs Fischbacher and Franziska Fermi-Heusi, who about 10 years ago sort of came up with a really good idea about how we could tackle that. So here's the experiment they came up with. So they said, okay, they invite people into a lab, like into a university lab. We economists have labs, the psychology have labs, where we just invite students or any type of person. There might be these little cubicles you see. I'm not sure whether you see my mouse. There's sort of a little curtain you can draw, and you sit there. You're unobserved. There's no secret camera. You just sit there, and the instructions are that you have to roll a die in your cubicle. So there's a die, a 6-sided die, like you see on the screen. You report what you've rolled to me. So you observe what you do. Then you tell me what you've rolled, and I pay you whatever you report back to me. So if you've claimed to roll 4, I pay you £4. If you claim to roll 1, I pay you £1. If you claim you've rolled 6, you get £6. I pay you the money, no questions asked. You leave the lab, that's it. That's the entire experiment. It's really short, it's really simple to understand, and that's it. So there's no secret camera, as I said. We truly don't know, the experimenter here truly doesn't know what the person really rolled. There we go. So first of all, let's look at the wish list. Does that tick all our boxes? Is it actual behavior? Yes. You can say something different from your roll. You can roll a 2 and say 4. There's real behavior. That's a real lie. You don't need to claim whether you've lied or not. I just observe, or sort of potentially observe what you're doing, but there's real behavior. There's a clear incentive to lie because I pay you to lie. I pay you, if you like money, what you should do is you should say 6, because then you get £6, even if you didn't roll a 6. Sure, if you rolled a 6, you're lucky, there's no need for lying, but for 5 out of 6 people, the ones that rolled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I pay you money, I pay you more money if you say a higher number than what you rolled. So I pay you to lie, that's good. And your private information is truly private. So the private information here, again, that's your true roll, what you've actually rolled, which I don't know, I as the experimenter, so that information is truly private. And there's no possibility of detection because I said there's no secret camera. I really don't know. I, as the experimenter, I really don't know what you've rolled. Now, that's great. We've ticked all these boxes. That's very good. But have we painted ourselves in the corner? If I can't observe whether you lied or not, how can I use this experiment to actually learn about whether you lied or not? Because you see, if I have a room with 100, an experiment, this type of experiment with 100 people, there should be some sixes in the room. So if you say six, if you report six to me, that could be perfectly true. So I cannot say whether your six is a lie. And if someone else says three, I don't know whether that's a lie or truthful, because people could even lie downwards. I mean, that would forgive money, but it's possible that someone rolls a five and says three or says one. So I'm not even sure whether the ones are truthful, because it could be that people lie downwards from a higher number down to one. So how can I learn about behavior then in this experiment? The key is that anybody can get lucky, but not everybody. Anybody can roll a six, but not everybody. We learn that in statistics, and if you try out with a die roll, you won't be able to roll sixes in a row. That means if I have more people, not just one person in the experiment, if I have 100 people, and all of them come out of the cubicle and they all tell me that they've rolled a six, then I know something's going on. And I can use statistics to figure out how much people should report, how much they deviate on average in that group from truthful reporting. I know what comes out of a truthful die roll, or sort of a real die roll, and I can observe what the entire group said, and I can now compare these two things, and I can indirectly infer something about the group, even though I cannot infer anything about any individual, only about the group. But coming back to the topic of the talk, whether men lie more than women, that's something that I can answer, because I can invite 100 men into the experiment, or 100 women and 100 women, and then I can compare how much men report, compare that to how much the women report, or what numbers they report on average. Okay? Even though any individual man or any individual woman can lie in an undetected way. I cannot judge any individual person in this experiment. But indirectly on the group level, on that group level, I can judge people. Now, because this experiment is so simple, it's really even children can understand this experiment. This experiment has been run around the world. We've collected that this has been run by many different researchers, economists, psychologists, sociologists, all over the world. My co-authors and I, we've just collected the data that everybody else has actually corrected, and they've done all the hard work, and we've just put it together. And so in this picture, you see all the countries where I know we've run, or other people have run these experiments. White means we don't have data from these countries, and all the other colors means that we have some data on this. So it's around the world, Northern Africa, Middle East, we need some more data, but otherwise we have quite a good coverage around the world. So what do we find in these experiments? Are your parents right that people don't lie? Or are the economists right that everybody will just say six, just say whatever is in the immediate monetary interest? Well, here's the results from all these 45,000 participants. So how do you read this graph? So on the y-axis is the average number that people reported in a given experiment. So we have about 400 different experiments here. Each dot is one experiment. There's one experiment, say, run in Oxford, or another experiment run in some other country, in some other city, with some other parameters. So each dot is one experiment, and the dot is the average report in that experiment. The bigger the dot, that means the more participants are in this particular experiment. You see sort of down on the right, 200 subjects is sort of a medium dot. So this dot at the top here, this might be 1,000 participants. Now on the y-axis, I said, is the reports from 1 to 6, the average report. So if everybody says 1, the average report would be 1. If everybody says 6, then the average report will be 6. That's what economists would predict. So economists would predict that all these bubbles, all these points should be at 6. I've also put 3.5 here. So the mathematicians among you will know why I put 3.5. 3.5 is the average of a die roll. So the average of saying 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 with equal probability is 1 plus 2, etc., plus 6 divided by 6 is 3.5. So if everybody in an experiment was truthful, on average, we should get a number of around 3.5. So we would pay out £3.50 on average. Now you see all these dots, almost all these dots lie somewhere between 3.5 and 6. Very few are at 6. So that means the economists, our normal assumption among economists is not correct, that everybody lies maximally always at 6. But also, your parents will be disappointed because there's very few studies where everybody told the truth and is at 3.5. On average, people lie up. So on average, people overreport, but only to a surprisingly small amount. So on average, if you take the average across all of these, is about 4.2. So people go only about a quarter of the way from £3.50 to £6. Just by telling the truth, they could pocket £3.50 on average. They could add £2.50 up to £6 by lying. And on average, people only make about a quarter of this way. So this could be due to a quarter of the people lying maximally and 3/4 of people not lying maximally, not lying at all, telling the truth. Or there could be because everybody exaggerates a little bit, or it could be some mix of that. Okay, but at the moment it's only about the averages. So first result is people lie surprisingly little, in particularly surprising for economists, because we would have thought that people lie much more. People leave money on the table here, lots of money on the table. Now, what my economist friends will say is like, well, come on, this is for £1 or £6. Come on, I'm not getting up for £6, and obviously I won't lie, so this is sort of small fry. Turns out, if you increase the stake sizes and you don't do it just for £1 or for £6, but for higher numbers, it doesn't change at all. So now look at the x-axis. So this is the report, the amount of money you can earn from lying in US dollar. We've converted all the different currencies into US dollars. So on the left-hand side of the graph, you see this is about 10 US cents, even less, sometimes less US cents. So it's really small stakes, really tiny amounts of money. And on the right-hand side, there's a study with 50 US dollars. So these are undergrad students in the US. They're offered, if you lie, I pay you 50 US dollars, or you get nothing. And it turns out people act in the same way if it's about 50 US dollars as it's for 50 US cents, or similar for pounds. So increasing the amount of stakes, if you increase the stakes, doesn't make people more honest or more dishonest. So this is quite robust in a sense. This doesn't go away just because the monetary amounts change. So let's look inside this distribution. So at the moment, I've just showed you averages. But let's look now just at these experiments that use these die rolls. There's some experiments that don't just use die rolls, but they use coin flips or other randomization devices. But let's look at the die roll experiments. So here I show you the histogram. So that means I show you the distribution. I show you how often each of the different numbers is reported. So on the left is from 1 to on the right is to 6. So you see that 6s, if you look at the blue bars, 6s are reported more often than 1s. So that's good news for economists in a sense. There's some lying going on. So 6s are reported more often than 1s. 5s are also reported quite often. 4s and 3s and 2s and 1s is less. But there are some people who say 1. And there's also some people who say 2. So it's not like everybody moves away from 1. It's curious that there's too many 5s here because there must be some liars among these 5s. The dashed line, the horizontal dashed line that you see, that's at 16%. That's at 1 in 6. That's the truthful distribution. If everybody told the truth, this overall distribution should be at 1 out of 6 for all of the 6 numbers, 1 to 6. And you see there's too many 5s. But that means there must be some liars among the people that report fives. So there must be some people who lie, but don't go all the way, don't go all to 6 and only go to 5. Or it could be that there might be some true 6s that lie down to 5. Who knows? We'll get back to that. But you see this increasing histogram. You see that there are more 6s than 1s. You see still too many 5s. But there's some people who say 1. We can also look at around, so that's the distribution within each experiment. We can go back to the averages. When you look across countries, you see that there are differences between countries. But even in the worst countries, in the countries that lie most, even there, they're very far away from 6. So the UK is somewhere in the middle, lying quite a lot down here, sort of on the right. Germany, one of my favorite countries, slightly further down. But there's countries on the left. Belgium, for example, here, we don't have very much data from Belgium, but they lie very little. France is on the right, very similar to Belgium, really, sorry for that. Anybody who comes from Belgium or France, but the behavior is quite different. Germany and Austria, for example, are quite different, but quite similar in culture, but Austria is on the left, Germany is here on the right. Again, behavior is quite different. Germans lie more than Austrians in our data, even though the cultures are actually quite similar. So there's no clear patterns in this cross-country data. It's not that all the Catholic countries on the right and the Protestant countries on the left, or the rich countries on the right and the poor countries on the left. It's not like that. It's slightly more subtle than that. But across all countries, we see that there's no country where people sort of all go out and lie all the way. There is across all countries, there's something that holds people back from lying. We can also split this by age. So here I show you the same graph, but now it's not split by country, but by age. So each bubble here is the average report across all experiments for each age group. So there's for all the 20-year-olds and all the 21-year-olds and all the 22-year-olds, etc. There's one bubble for each age group. And you see children on the left, around 10, 15. We don't have that much data among children. They lie more. Then students, we got lots of students. They also lie quite a lot, these students. And then as people get older, it seems on average that the lying goes down. And once you hit 50 or so, it's indistinguishable from everybody saying the truth. So we see across all of these studies, we see this downward trend in dishonesty, that kids lie a lot, sort of students, teenagers, young people lie a little bit less, and then it goes down with age. Now, what can explain this behavior? So economists, what we do is that we look at data, that's what I've showed you, and then we try to get some maths out. We write a mathematical model to explain this behavior. And that's what I want to do today with you. Very simple, don't worry, there's not much maths involved, but I want you to predict what will happen. So I write down a mathematical model, or at least a precise model. So let's imagine that our participants roll a 6-sided die, and I know, or I assume, that 50% of these subjects are perfectly honest, always say what they rolled, and 50% of the subjects always report whatever yields the most money. So their roll is a 1 to 6. Half of the people say what they rolled, and half of the people say whatever yields the most money. So if you open the chat, if you go into Zoom and open the chat, my colleague Ali has just posted a link to menti.com. If you click on that, or if you don't want to click on that, you can also get out your phone and use this QR code here on the screen that link sends you to the same link. And there's 2 questions at this link, and I want you to answer both of these questions. The first question is, in this situation where people roll a 6-sided die and 50% are honest and 50% lie maximally, how many participants will report having rolled a 1? That's the first question. How many people will report, or what's the share of people that have reported to have rolled a 1? And what's the share of people that report having rolled a 6? So take a moment to think about that, and then click on the link and answer these 2 questions. The first question is, What's the share of people? How many participants will report having rolled a 1? And then you have to click submit. And the second question is, how many participants will report having rolled a 6? Just click on the link in the chat, answer the 2 questions, and then Ali will show us the results in a minute. Take your time. So Ali, whenever you're ready, you can share the screen as soon as people have answered the questions. Okay, so very good. So first question was, how many participants will report having rolled a 1? And we see a vast majority of you say it should be 1 in 12 people. That's very good. That's the correct answer. And what's the second question? How many people will have reported a 6? Lots of people said 7 in 12. Exactly. That's again, you're really good at that. Let me show you how I would have answered the question. So if you stop sharing again, I go back onto the slides. So this is how I would answer the question. So on average, each of these numbers should be equally likely to roll. Okay, because people are not more lucky or less lucky. So half of the people report exactly what they rolled. So they stay, when they roll a 1, they say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They just stay where they are. So half of the ones stay at 1, and half of the ones, these are the liars, they jump into 6 because 6 earns you most of the money. So that jumps to 6. So the people who are left at 1 are the truthful ones. So 1/2 of 1 in 6. So that's exactly 1 in 12. Well done, everybody. And now it's slightly more complicated because now at the 6s, there's the truthful 6s, that's 1 in 12, and then half of everybody who jumps into 6 are the liars. So that's another 6. So overall, we have 7 out of 12. So 3.5 out of 6. Very good. So that's exactly how we would do the maths, what economists would really do. We would use a model. We've now, what not in a mathematical term, but what I've shown you here is that I make some assumptions about behavior. I can write this in a more mathematical way if you want to, don't worry. And then I try to predict what that model will do, and then I compare it to the data. Now let's compare this prediction to our data. So our data is this. That's what we found. First thing was, are there some 1s, or are there more 6s than 1s? Okay, that was our first check. Yes, there are more 6s than 1s. Very good. Second was, there are too many 5s. You remember? There were too many 5s. This model doesn't create too many 5s. It's the same amount of 5s as 4. So this model isn't very good at explaining that part. And then the third one was, there are also some 1s. And so that's good. And we get that. So this model isn't too bad. It doesn't capture it all, but it does get this sort of, there's somewhat increase. You get this jerky increase from 5 to 6, but it's not too far off. So perhaps we can do better than that. Ali, I will skip the second survey. So what we've done in this paper, what the real economists did, we didn't just look at one model. We looked at 22 models, and we did lots of maths in the background to come up with lots of predictions. I won't go into detail here, don't worry. I just can say that what we find at the end is that of all these 22 models, only one combination survives. It has to be a combination of wanting to be honest and wanting to appear honest. Only that combination together can explain the data. The data that I've shown you, this histogram that I've shown you, but we've created lots of other data, and there's other data in the already created by other people. That's the only model that can explain the data. So the model that we have looked at, that you've looked at, that you've just solved, is a model of people wanting to be honest. Or at least there's 50% of the people, they want to be so much, they want to be honest so much that they don't lie at all. You can imagine a model where people only want to be honest a little bit. They don't want to deviate too much from the truth. That's another way of doing that. Both of these models can't explain fully what's going on. What you need as an additional ingredient is that people want to appear as honest. So what do I mean with appearing as honest? Let's imagine you come home, you've participated in this experiment, you come home and you tell your partner, you know what, I participated in this funky experiment today, they paid me some money, and I said 6. I got lucky and I rolled a 6 and I reported a 6. What would your husband or your wife or your parents say to you? Would they say, oh, that's great, how lucky you are? Or would they say, 6 is quite unlikely, isn't it? I wonder whether you actually told the truth. If you don't want people to think bad things about you, and you can't prove what you rolled in this experiment, you might not want to say 6. You might want to say 5 or 4. And that means you might want to lie if you go if your true roll is a 1, you might want to go to 4. But it might also mean that you want to perhaps lie down if you are lucky enough to roll a 6, but you really care about your reputation as an honest person, you might want to lie down. And we find that both of these motives are really important. People want to be honest. Some people want to be honest to some extent, but also wanting to appear honest is really important. And as you see in all the slides, there's lots of maths in the background. So if you don't believe what I'm saying, there's a paper on the website where you can check all the maths and make sure that that I'm not lying to you. So overall, what we find is that there's surprisingly little, even if people can obtain quite a lot of money when they lie, even if we pay them a lot of money, people don't lie. And only a combination of a desire to be honest with a desire to appear honest can explain the data. This is actually a very active research area. Lots of people are working on this at the moment. There's many open questions. But this is only not just happening in the research. This is something we teach to our students. So if you come to Oxford and if you study PPE and you take the course on behavioral economics in third year undergrad, or if you take a master's, these are the things, these would be the type of data that we would discuss with you. And perhaps you can run your own experiment. But I haven't told you yet about men and women. So what do you think? Do men lie more than women, or do women lie more than men? Well, that's the final question here. So the answer is men lie more than women. You have to believe me on that one, but it's true. So here's the data. Here's the entire data that we have on men and women. So on the x-axis, I show you the average male report, and on the y-axis is the average report of women. We only classify people as this is in a binary world here. We only look at men and women. We don't have many people that don't identify. We don't have data on people that don't identify as neither. So this is only people that identify as male or men or women. So each dot again is here one experiment. And you see if both men and women told lies to the same extent, then this dot should lie on the 45-degree line, should lie on this diagonal line. But we see that most of these dots lie below it. That means that men on average lie more than women. There are some experiments where women lie more than men, but on average, men lie more than women. Perhaps it's easier to see in the histogram, the one that I showed you. So here M is the histogram for the men, and F is for female, F for female, M for male. And you see both of these histograms go up. So men and women are not reporting 1s often enough, and they report 6s too often, but men are even worse than women. Women aren't angels. I'm afraid to sort of break that. but men are even worse. So men are over-reporting sixes more often than women do, and they're sort of moving away from ones and twos and threes more than women do. So on average, both men and women lie. Men lie even more, but keeping that in perspective compared to what economists think about people, both men and women are lying very little. We have 15 minutes for questions, 10, 15 minutes for questions. If you want to know more, there's a website that we put together, which is called preferencesfortruthtelling.com. It's a long name, sorry for that, where you find interactive versions of all the graphs that I showed you and more graphs where you can play around with the data and see what happens in your country, only look at students, only look at men, only look at women, and find out more about this topic. So go at this website, preferencesfortruthtelling.com. But before that, I think we'll answer some questions if there are any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johannes. It was more. So there's a couple of questions on the Q&A. I'll pick 3 maybe, and then if time allows, we can do more. I'll start with a very practical question, so probably it has a short answer. Can't we monitor brain waves when people lying and sort out whether they lie or not?
Yes, we can do that. It turns out that monitoring brainwaves is really expensive. So when you actually you would use this machine that I showed at the beginning, like an MRI machine, and you would monitor brainwaves. People have done that, but it's difficult to keep this secrecy intact. So you would need to ask participants to lie about something that the experimenter already knows. And so we can tell whether that's a lie, and then we can compare how the brain waves sort of differ between situations when you lie or when you don't lie. So people have done that. We know quite well which parts of the brain are responsible for lying. It's sort of feeling parts, the sort of where our feeling sits, they play a role, but also sort of cognitive parts play a role where people sort of seemingly think about, okay, what's in it for me? Is it worth the risk? Sort of like a cognitive way of thinking about things. And both of these things are at play when people lie. But that's a very good question.
Okay, another question. So maybe so the question, what is the explanation?
Bana, you're dropping out.
I think I know what question she was going to ask, so I can ask it.
Freya,
So,
just jump in.
yeah, what is the explanation for men lying more than women? Is there a psychological difference between the two genders?
That's a good question, and I don't have an answer yet. So I'm working on that, or I'm trying to work on that. So if you break it down into these two desires that people want to be honest and people want to appear as honest, it could be that these two things differ, so that women want to appear more honest than men, or it could be the first one, that women have an inherent desire to be more honest than men. Originally, I thought that it's mostly about the reputational case, but it turns out that it's mostly the other part. So that's what we know. It's mostly that women want to be more honest, not so much about the reputation, but they want to be more honest rather than men. But it's really tricky to find out the details of that. So you need sort of complicated studies to sort of back it out. But it seems that women are just more honest per se, even when reputation is not at stake. So good news about women again. Always good news.
Thank you. And our next question is, how does a lack of honesty affect economic markets, such as fake reviews and biased data? And how may AI change this in the future? Would it change things for good or for bad?
Yes, it has. So first part of the question is very important. Yes, obviously it has a big effect. It goes beyond fake reports and these sort of direct lying. So sort of very fundamentally in economics, the reason for quite a lot of the economic systems that we have, for example, how we tax people, that we tax income, etc., the way you pay taxes is all based on the fact that we don't know your true, so that you can lie, and that some people, perhaps not everybody, but many people will lie. So if we had a magic wand to find out the truth about you, then, for example, we would change the entire tax system. So it's really a very fundamental question. And fake reviews is one of the many things. The way we organize our healthcare systems, for example, I had the example at the beginning of the doctor saying that you need this expensive procedure, even though you don't need perhaps you don't need the procedure. Quite a lot of things around how we organize our healthcare systems is based around the problem that the doctor knows more than the patient knows, and the doctor and the patient together know more than the insurer knows. So in the UK, we've gone one way. We basically create an incentive for doctors to underreport. So we create a financial incentives for GPs to say, no, you don't need expensive procedures. And that means then the NHS, as a consequence, for example, is relatively cheap because doctors do underreport. And in other countries, Germany, Switzerland, US, most other countries, these health insurance systems have a baked-in incentive for doctors to over-report the necessity of expensive procedures. And in those countries, you get an oversupply of expensive procedures, and they're more expensive as a consequence. So there's lots of aspects of our economy and how our economic system works that are all based on the potential of people to lie. I'm not saying that all doctors lie, totally not, but I'm saying there's the incentive to lie, and some doctors will lie, consciously or unconsciously. But most of doctors are honest, but still, we need to deal with the ones that are not. What about AI? That's a very good question. So AIs can lie. So when you talk to ChatGPT and instruct ChatGPT to lie, it will lie to you. You will have heard of hallucinations, where large language models sort of make up stuff. I'm not sure that's really a lie, more philosophical question, but clearly they have the ability to say wrong things. The question is whether we could use AI to build a system that sort of checks whether people lie and sort of thus makes sure that we somehow find out the truth, or sort of makes sure that nobody can lie, and that could have a big effect. It turns out that it's often really difficult to find out whether people lie. We don't like to be lied to, but we're also really, really bad at finding out whether someone lied or not. And that actually that brings us back to the beginning. That's what makes celebrity traitors so interesting, because we see how everybody lies, and we see how everybody struggles to find out who's a traitor and who's not a traitor. And it turns out it's really difficult. It's really difficult to find out whether someone lies or not. And perhaps AI can help us with that, but we're not quite there yet. But there's perhaps hope for the future.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one or two more. So next question, what is the role of risk in the decision? So here, raising the stakes is about gaining money, but what about risk of losing money or a punishment? Do you think that would make a difference?
Yes, it makes a difference. If you compare gains and losses. So in general, we know that people don't like losing, not losing in a sort of football sense, losing, but sort of they dislike having less than yesterday. They like if things get better. So we know from psychology, but there's also lots of economics research across the social sciences. We know something that is called, what Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky called loss aversion. People are averse to losses compared to some reference point. So when you have any outcome, you find 10 pounds in your pocket, you compare that to some reference point. If you expected that there was 20 pounds in your pocket, that's your reference point. Having less than that feels bad. If yesterday you had 0 pounds in your pocket and today you have 10 pounds, that feels good. So that's the gains and the losses. And we know that people find losses worse than equal-sized gains. There are experiments with gains and losses with lying, and people, yes, because they think about they dislike losses. They're willing to lie more to avoid losses of a certain amount, of a certain monetary amount. Then they're willing to lie to sort of to gain a similarly sized gain. So in that sense, there's gains and losses. The risk here is interesting. The risk comes from the die roll. You roll the die and you don't know whether you get a 1 and a 6. But the risk here, that allows you to hide behind the other people. Let's imagine a situation where we had a die with only one side. Yeah, it's just a 1. But you could say 6. Doesn't really make sense. Yeah, but there's no risk involved. But that would also mean that whenever you say 6, you know the die only says 1. You have a die with 6 ones. All the 6s must be liars. So that's a very different setting. And we know that if it's really easy to find out whether you're a liar, then your reputation is very bad. People know for sure that you're a liar, and people don't really dislike that. So the risk here is really important because it gives this veil. You can hide behind the true 6s. If you have a normal die roll, you can hide behind the true 6s, and that makes it possible and makes it agreeable for you to lie because you have enough truthful 6s to lie behind. So the risk is really important for the lie. If we can get rid of the risk, my prediction would be that we'll get less lying.
Great, thank you. And final question. After years of researching honesty, do you find yourself trusting people less or more?
That's a very private question. I went into this project years ago, or this and other projects, thinking that this is such an easy way to get money. In these experiments, they're £6. You don't have to do anything. We just give you the money. Why don't you take it? And I was actually surprised, as most of my economics colleagues were surprised by how little lying there is. So to some extent, my trust has gone up. But when I talk to psychologists, they start from the assumption that oh my God, everybody will tell the truth, and it's quite horrible that even few people lie. You see, sort of economists, they're really nice people, but they're sort of perhaps more pessimistic about the world, and that's optimistic news. And my psychology colleagues, they're sort of more optimistic, and this is slightly more pessimistic news. I'm now trusting people more. I'm thinking actually ahead and saying, based on the results that we have, can we introduce methods? Can we introduce institutions? Can we change institutions such that people have a stronger incentive to tell the truth? Can we, for example, build on what we found out, that reputation is important? Can we build on that to improve our tax system, improve our healthcare system, improve whatever situation in a work environment, improve how people write personal statements that I have to read, to make the system better, work better for all of us?
Great, thank you very much.